Hello, everyone. Welcome to your next lecture of Introduction to Communication. This week we are going to be talking about perception and self, which is your chapter 2. So let's just get straight into it. So first off, when talking about perception, what is it? What are we even talking about? So perception is the use of sense to process information about the external environment. So basically, perception acts like a filter that influences our experiences, our assessment of others, and our communication with them. The uniqueness of human experience is based largely on those differences in perception. So, right, I have two photos. These are famous people. So, besides that, right, two guys from these photos, what's your perception of them? Right? I basically it's like we see they're kind of mean mugging, like they're not smiling. Most of the time on camera, like these two men are known to like not smile, not just kind of mean mug, like the the RBF, if we may, for men. Um, but both of them have said they don't like media attention sometimes. So this may account for like the facial expressions they have when they're being photographed, when they're being videotaped, and this doesn't mean that they're mean and unfriendly, right? But we're just perceiving them that way because that is what our perception is, all we have to work with. So adding perception as a factor to how we communicate really increases the complexity of it all. So I have these two examples. I won't play them. I'm just nervous that it's not going to go, but I'll link these in D2L and y'all can go. So I'll give y'all a second, take I don't know, pause this, go and watch the double boink. It'll be linked. And then after that, watch this fans fail at kicking 43-yard goal. Okay, so after we've watched, the two videos, you know, the takeaway of like those two, right? We see the Bears kicker not being able to kick in, right? So then all these Bears fans are just like, bro, what the fuck? Like, I could do that easily, And they're like, I don't think it's that easy. The kicker's like, okay, I'd like to see you try. And they literally didn't do it, right? They weren't able to do it. So it's like people, right, because of their perception, they believe they can perform tasks just by watching or observing. But there's a gap of what we perceive we can do and what we can actually do. And so that's just something I wanted us to really look at and think about. So when it comes again, right, we think we can do things. Let's talk about the differences in our perceptions. So we're going to go through each one of these, but let's start with our identity factors, right? So our identity factors is again, sex, gender, height, weight, senses, ableness, ethnicity, age, hair color, attractiveness. It's all these different things that identify who we are as people. Um, this like think about like you may be tall or short, have poor eyesight, have impaired hearing, you're sensitive to smells, your body temperature is cooler than others. How does each of these affect your perception of the world? How does this affect how you perceive others, right? Like think about just tall people going through the world looking down on people or having to like crouch their head. Where short people, it's like they're looking up constantly. Like their perception is purely like how they view the world. Like things that are tall, things that are short, their perceptions are different. Same thing like being a woman and being a man. How does that affect your perception of the world and how it works, and the systems in place? I'm talking about literally senses. My boyfriend, he's like spice, like he's big spice man. Me, I can't take any spice at all. So like if we're eating the same food, I may be like, oh my gosh, this is so spicy. Like, I can't even eat anymore. And I'm literally like, nose boogers coming out, literally coughing, like dying, drinking tons of water, sweating, where he's literally like, this isn't spicy at all, right? Our perception of the spiciness of the food is completely different because of our identity factors. So those are just a couple of things that I want you to think about. So next, let's talk about temporal conditions. So just think this temporal, just think temporary conditions. So this is like having a headache, being fatigued, having a pulled muscle, being hungry, being thirsty. This affects our perception, right? Because imagine like you have a headache or you're kind of hungry, right? Have a hangry moment. Like someone might say like a positive comment to you, like, "Oh my gosh, I like love your shoes" or something. And because you're feeling like this temporary condition where you're feeling kind of negative and kind of like blah and not good, then you might be like, what is that supposed to mean? It's like, whoa, 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 that's not supposed to mean anything. But because of this condition that you're currently in, like being hangry, you perceive a comment differently than its intention. So that's a way that our differences in perception can affect our communication. Next, let's talk about our past experiences and roles. So, just like the state of being can affect, so can your past and various roles as a person. So, this is called perpetual constancy. So, this is the idea that your past experiences lead you to see the world in a way that is difficult to change, which is your initial perceptions persist. Um, I think about like my own, like my mom was a teacher. She was like really strict on grades, like literally would have grade checks. And if I didn't have an A, I'd get my phone taken away. So like I grew up never really like talking back to teachers, always turning in my homework on time. If I ever like failed something, it would be like the end of the world. Like if it's not an A, like I'm dumb and I'm stupid, but I perceive academics and grades as something important, obviously, right? And teachers to be knowledgeable and fair. So, and I mean, like, look, here I am, I'm a teacher now. So it's like that's how I interacted with people and people, well, like teachers, and like I would never talk back. Oh my gosh, that'd be a nightmare and I never would want to get in trouble. So it's like because my mom was a teacher and that's how like she ran my academics, that's how I like consistently ended up seeing academics throughout my life and like perceived it to be that way. Then we have role, which is the part you play in various social contexts. So for example, right here, I'm your instructor, so I'm here like to tell you like what to do, what's going on. I'm the one that planned the class, so I need to make sure, like, hey, like, you need to know X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, she planned the class. She knows what she's talking about. You would hope, right? Um, so you may perceive me as organized or knowledgeable, um, or good at my job. But if I go home and I start telling my boyfriend, what to do and how to do it, like his perception of me may be like bossy and mean and naggy, right? So it's like I'm using the same set of skills in the classroom and at home, but they're perceived very different because my role is different. My role for you is the instructor, and that's the expectation of that, where my role at home is just to be like a significant other, and those are not the expectations. So your past experiences and your roles affect those differences in perception. Next is present feelings and circumstances. So this is basically how you emotionally feel in the moment. Um, like for example, right, you stayed up all night studying for a test that you want to do good on, which made you stressed. Then someone asked you like, how are you doing? You might say like, like like this sucks and are horrible, like very whiny complaints. That's not your usual response. Like it's just these present feelings that are affecting your um like reaction to things. Like I told you in my welcome video, I'm reading Harry Potter right now. So in the fifth book, I think. Yeah, fifth book. So in like the Order of the Phoenix, Harry, like, he's seen Voldemort come back. He's literally seen one of his classmates die because of Voldemort. And then, like, the wizarding world just was like, Dumbledore was like, hey, like, just go back to your, like, Muggle family and just wait the summer. And so he's kind of like, bro, what the heck? And his friends aren't able to tell him anything. No one's telling him anything, and he's getting really frustrated. So, like, then when they tell him what's going on, he's like, why was I not allowed to do this? And then Dumbledore isn't really talking to him. And so he's feeling really frustrated emotionally, like he's pissed, he's frustrated, he just wants to know what's going on and why people are avoiding him. So like there's all these different like very innocent interactions between like a girl he likes, literally with Hermione and Ron, who are his friends, and he just blows up on them to the point where they're like, you need to calm down. Like, we get it why you're frustrated, but like, don't take it out on us. Like, we could only do so much, right? So, his present feelings and circumstances, right? He was isolated, he was frustrated, and that then in the long run, like, ended up him like blowing up on people and being very like nasty or even just assuming the worst. Like, they're talking about me, they're blah, 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 right? So, that's how our present feelings and circumstances can affect our perception. So, lastly, we have the current social and political events. So, this is basically talking about how the feelings you have towards the environment, social justice events, mental health issues, or animal rights, that affects your perception. You know, the stance you take on these cultivates a perception within you and others about what it means to be passionate about the cause. And likewise, your stance influences how you view other people who care about that issue and those who you believe don't. So, like, for example, if I believe we need to vote to make sure the pothole in the parking lot um, is fixed, and one of y'all said that voting really doesn't matter. You know, I may perceive that as you don't care about the community or the safety, or maybe you have a lot of money because car costs don't matter to you, right? Like, my perception of you is that, oh, like I'm jumping to all these conclusions because your stance isn't aligning with my belief that I think is right and morally just. So I have these perceptions of you based off of that because it differs from mine. And it doesn't always have to be negative. It's just like your perception of certain people, right? If someone says like they're a left-leaning liberal, right? Then you might have like a certain perception based off of stereotypes off of that. Same thing with the opposite side, conservative Republican, right? What does that look like in your head, right? If like you can envision those stereotypes in your head, like you can see where your perception lies. Some of y'all may favor one than the other. That's your perception, right? Working. So those are our um, differences in perception. So now that we've talked about all of those differences, how they affect our perception, let's move on to the perceptual process. So this is 3 steps: selection, organization, and interpretation. So let's get into all of those. So starting with selection, right? This is basically like you choose what stimulus you focus on or neglect, right? You don't remember every car you saw or every person on the sidewalk, but you may choose like, oh, that was a red car that looked like my friend's car, or that guy was dressed kind of weird, and so I'm going to avoid him, right? So I'm selecting those things to pay attention to, but I'm not going to remember every tree I pass by. This is the same thing with like we choose what social media ads or posts you pay attention to and which ones you scroll on by. So there's four types of these. We have selective exposure, selective attention, selective perception, and selective retention. So your selective exposure is you expose yourself to information that reinforces rather than contradicts your beliefs or opinions. So this is like a conservative Republican is more likely to listen to Fox News versus a liberal Democrat are more likely to listen to MSNBC, right? I'm purposely exposing myself to information that constantly reinforces my already created beliefs. Then we have selective attention. So this is you focus on certain cues and avoid others. So, for example, like before class, you may notice someone got a haircut, but you didn't notice a new flyer posted on the board. In class, right, when we have a discussion, you may be totally focused on what your partner is saying and be totally oblivious to the music I'm playing in the background. And this is the same thing of like, we're very cued into like certain sounds, words, and phrases. So like our brain will kind of select, like if there's a bunch of people boom, like wah 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 wah. It sounds like that. And then all of a sudden you hear your name, you kind of perk up and you look around, right? That gets your attention. If someone yells stop, oh my gosh, you're gonna stop and look. If someone yells fire, if someone says watch out, you're gonna look up and it's gonna get your attention. Our next one is selective perception, which is the tendency to hear, see, and believe only what you want to see, hear, and believe. So this is like your favorite team gets called out for a penalty or foul, and you might automatically be like, that's stupid, that's blah, blah, blah. Like, think of, I'm gonna bring it up. Think of the Astros, right? People still bring up the cheating scandal. Um, and when they do, oh my gosh, I take it so personally. I'm literally like, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. Um, but right, it's like I don't want to perceive the Astros as negative. So I'm purposely selecting to perceive them as positive. I'm like, oh, everyone does it, right? So that is my perception. Like, did they really do anything wrong? It's so wrong. I know, I know. And lastly, we have selective retention. So this is the tendency to better remember the things that reinforce your beliefs than those that oppose them. So say like if your parent puts you in timeout growing up, like as an adult, you probably don't think of that one time you were in timeout. You think of them supporting you, like at your functions or being loving, um, or patching you up when you fell off your bike. Um, and kind of like off of that, right? It's like you remember these traumatic events and experiences that you found threatening, and you remember when someone was unfair to you, when someone praised your work. Like you size up people or you size people up based on like your memories with them. So it's like that retention of like, what do I remember our interactions to be? And I select one or the other, right? Like if you're dating a significant other that you really like, but people are telling you like, hey, they're no good, they're doing bad stuff behind your back, you might have this selective retention of like, I'm just remembering the things that line up with what I've seen and what I believe, right? So I'm going to ignore what my friends are saying. So that's the first step of the perceptual process, which is just selecting the stimuli you pay attention to. Hate that that didn't show up. But next we have organization. So the first three we're going to talk about is um, figure and ground, closure, and proximity. And we know what organization is, but just so you have it, organization is a grouping of stimuli into meaningful units or wholes. So figure and ground, figure is the focal point of your attention, and the ground is the background. So this is kind of a good example because some people, their figure is the like lamp vase, whatever we want to call it, candlestick, And then the background is the green. But if the green's your focal point, then you're like, okay, it's two faces and then white space in between. So, right, this is how you're kind of switching what figure and what the ground is, and that changes how you perceive this image. Same thing like when you hear a name in a noisy room, your name is the figure, and the remaining noise around it is the ground. Same thing like you get a feedback on an assignment, um, that which says both what you did well and what you could improve on. But the grade wasn't what you wanted, so all you hear is the critiques, right? You don't even hear like the things you did well on it. And next, we'll talk about closure. So closure is the tendency to fill in missing information to complete an otherwise incomplete figure or statement. That's like, I'm sure, like, read this right now. I'm sure you can do it. But I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. The phenomenal power of the human mind. It doesn't matter in what orders the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place, right? Our brains are literally filling in the gaps because of the first and last letter. Um, Same thing we can use in our perceptions, right? If someone says, like, I've had many blessings or I prayed about this, you can conclude that this person is religious, right? If you don't know this person is religious, if they say that, you're like, okay, like you're a spiritual religious person. You're filling in those gaps. And next is proximity. So people or objects that are close to each other in time or space are seen meaningfully related. So this was just a picture of like three lines, and three lines. And so the whole thing was like, do you see this as 9 lines or do you see this as three groups of 3 lines, right? This idea of like how we group people and things just because they're close together. Think about, like if two people arrive at the same time to a party, an event, like we assume that they're together, because they walked in, they had that proximity. Um, so that's our proximity. So that's our start of organization, and then we have a couple more, or I guess we just have one more. So our last one is similarity. So this is the elements that are grouped together because they resemble each other in size, color, shape, etc. Um, so think about this, literally like our human groups, how we group them together. This could be by ethnicity, religion, politics, interest, and there's always that in group. The in group is who we identify with, and the out group is everyone who we don't identify with, who we don't see as similar to us, right? Like this could literally be skin color, it could be nationality, it could be our religion. Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? And this could also literally just be like, I'm interested in anime and these people aren't. I'm interested in like fishing and hunting and these people aren't, right? So that's also an aspect of our in-group, out-group, how we organize people um, into those similarities. So another aspect of the perceptual process is interpretation. So this is the assignment of meaning to stimuli. I'm not going to play this again, like I told you. I'm like traumatized now from recording a whole video and like it didn't upload because it was like copyright, but I posted this in our discussion post as an example. But this is, right, again, Harry Potter, first movie. And he is in his first Quidditch match and he is on his broom. He's flying around, but he's like his broom looks like it's being like cuckoo crazy and it's not like functioning right. And it looks like he's about to be like thrown off of it and he's literally hanging off of it. And so Hermione and Ron are in the crowd and they look at like over and they see Professor Snape, one of the teachers, um to be looking at Harry like muttering something under his breath. So they have this perception of like Snape to be this person going out like that's after Harry that hates him. And so they're like, oh my gosh, because he's doing these, that means like because he's looking, because he's saying stuff under his breath, that means he's out to get Harry. He's the one doing this, which turns out not to be true. But because of their perception, like they interpret his actions as being out to get Harry, which isn't true. He was actually trying to save him. So an aspect of this is also like errors in our perception. So our first error in our perception leads to stereotyping. So this occurs when we offer a hasty generalization about a group based on a judgment about an individual from that group. So like we naturally just group people. It's a natural process. Our brains do it when we are unfamiliar with people, um, or anything, right? But this becomes an issue when we don't really allow these people to move away from those initial perceptions, right? We don't allow them to um, be more than those perceptions. That's when we have an issue with stereotyping. Also, I'll link this one. It's good. You'll get it. And our next error in perceptions is our first impressions. So this is an initial opinion about people upon meeting them. So literally in this scenario, our nonverbals very, very strong, right? The type of clothing people are wearing, the height, the weight, the attractiveness. Um, literally, like I was talking about earlier, like the girlies with RBF, resting bitch face. Like, what does that mean? Right? Think of like your first date, an interview, a first day of class, like times that you were like, oh, this person's awesome. And then you get to know them and you're like, oh gosh, like they are not it. I don't want them working for me. I don't want to be dating them. And vice versa. Like people at first that you were like, they're annoying. I do not want to be their friend. And then they end up being your best friend, right? So first impressions definitely add errors to our perceptions. So those are our two errors, stereotyping and first impressions. So now I want you to think about who you are, right? Like we talked about in our human communication lecture, the self is an important aspect of that communication. You know, what we need to start thinking about in this class before we move on is who you are and how that contributes to yourself as a communicator. So, first off is our personal identity, right? Think of that as the are you a shy or intro extrovert? Are you smart? Are you like there's so many things about you. Like I want you to think about who you are, right? And why is that important? Like as a speaker, you can create messages that share value with your listeners. Then they will perceive you as relatable and more likely to be persuaded by your message, right? So in order to create strong messages and influence others, you need to know who you are. And our next aspect is symbolic interactionalism. So this is the process of development of the self through the messages and feedback received from others. And we definitely talked about this in our last lecture. But, if someone's like, oh, you're really good at singing, you might be like, okay, like maybe I should do something. Or it's so literally like I just watched The Help, so I was thinking about this. But like how all the moms interact with like one of the little girls and they talk about just how ugly and fat she is basically. She's literally like 3, 4 years old, and like those interactions through messages with people that develops who we are and how we see ourselves as people. So our last thing is how you present yourself. So when it comes to perception, right, this is kind of talking about how we are able to influence others to perceive us through our self-presentation or our impression management, which basically is just depending on the situation, the context, I am changing, I don't want to say change because I'm not saying you need to change yourself, but you are just putting on certain aspects for them to think a certain way about you. So, for example, if you are going to a job interview for a corporate job in downtown Houston, right? What are the verbals you're using? What are the nonverbals versus you're going to a coffee shop with your friends downtown? What clothing are you wearing? What language? Is it formal, informal, right? You're changing who the words you use, the clothes you wear, to put off a certain impression of who you are and your abilities and what you're able to do, right? A job, right? You want to get hired, so you want to make a good first impression, but you also want it to be obvious that you can do the job and you're responsible and you're organized. So that's the basically the face you're putting on. Or with your friends, they don't care if you're organized or that you work hard. They just want to know, like, hey, are you a good friend? And are you fun? And do we have things in common? Right? And that's how you switch this presentation of yourself to change those perceptions. Okay, that is our lecture on perception. And basically, like, the takeaway of that is, every situation warrants a different response, but we are managing how people perceive us to make our best impression. And I want you to be aware of moving forward in any of your interpersonal interactions, small group, presentation, public speaking. What are your perceptions? What are your perceptions of others? And how does that affect the language, the clothing, the word choices, all the things in your communication aspect? So, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please do not hesitate to email me. And happy discussion post and quiz. Okay, bye.